Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Laura Bush.
Thank you all. Hi, guys, right on the front row. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the 6th annual Laura Bush Book Club, which is part of our series, Engage at the Bush Center, presented by Next Point. A special thanks to Next Point for endowing our Engage series. I'd also like to thank HEB for supporting the Laura Bush Book Club, and thanks especially for inviting teachers and librarians as your guests for tonight's program. As a former teacher and librarian, I'm happy to be surrounded by educators and book lovers. You all are my people. Before we get started this evening, I have two exciting announcements. I'm thrilled to announce that this year, the Laura Bush Foundation for America's Libraries has awarded $1 million in library grants to 200 schools from 40 states, including 17 schools here in North Texas. One of this year's grants recipients is J.N. Irvin Elementary School, which I visited in March to celebrate Read Across America Day. I read Our Great Big Backyard to a first grade class. One of the best parts of being a teacher is that your job is never boring, and reading to this class reminded me just how rewarding teaching is and how grateful we should all be for the wonderful teachers that educate our children and grandchildren. I'm proud that since 2002, the Laura Bush Foundation has awarded $22 million to over 3,800 schools. These grants help librarians restock and update their library collections with new books and revised resource materials. You can learn more about the Laura Bush Foundation by visiting www.bushcenter.org/LBF. I'm also excited that we've released my annual summer reading list. The 2024 summer reading list features something for everyone, from toddlers through middle schoolers. We've selected 3 themes this year: the dog days of summer, Paris 2024, and friends and family. And that includes classics like The Little Engine That Could, as well as newer releases like Love Comes First, written by 2 of my favorite authors, our daughters, Barbara and Jenna. The most important thing parents and caregivers can do for their children is to spend time reading with them. So I hope you'll bring this list to your local library and pick out a few books to read as a family this summer. Your kids and grandkids will love it, and so will you. You can see the full summer reading list behind me, or visit bushcenter.org/summerreading2024. And now, the reason you're gathered here is to hear from the esteemed author of The Tattooist of Auschwitz, Heather Morris, who traveled all the way from Australia to join us for tonight's program. The Tattooist of Auschwitz is an international bestseller, and for good reason. From the first page, readers are captivated and shocked by the bravery and resilience of the prisoners at Auschwitz-Birkenau. I've been fascinated by this history since I was a little girl. My father served in the Army during World War II. When Daddy came home from war in 1946, he brought with him 8 tiny photos from Nordhausen, Germany, the site of Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. Mother kept them along with some letters in an old latch-top cigar box. As a child, I used to take them out one by one and examine them to study the tiny images frozen in time by the camera's lens. They were pictures of row upon row of bodies of the dead, some bloated and some so skeletal they were little more than bones with the last remnants of skin stretched over them, and sunken torsos in which you could count every rib. There was an image of 3 separate rows of bodies, some naked, some still wearing the rough striped pants and shirts that the Nazis had forced upon them. My dad had written on the back that one of the photos shows how the lines of corpus continued well beyond that second white building. On another photo, showing the grotesque death grips of naked men, he wrote after a long explanation, "Tear it up if you wish." But no one ever could, ever did, ever wanted to. Daddy's unit, the Timberwolves, had liberated Nordhausen. His battalion had fought its way into the heavily fortified German town. He was among the early wave of troops to enter the camp, sent to render aid and to witness what had happened at Mittelbau-Dora. About 1,000 prisoners were alive when he arrived. Many of the living were hiding among the dead, or they were too weak to even roll away from those who had died next to them. Some of the newly freed tried with their last remaining strength to salute their liberators. The American troops dropped their heads in their hands and wept. My father wrote on the back of one small rectangle that he thought the photo would look different, but the camera lens had been too small to capture the enormity of the scene. Yet Daddy didn't talk about Nordhausen. Once every year or two, when Mother and Daddy and I would open that box of photos, he couldn't bring himself to say a single word. Decades later, right after George became president, I stood with George and my mother in the Capitol Rotunda for a ceremony marking the Day of Remembrance for the Holocaust. We watched as flags from each American military unit that had liberated the Nazi death camps were carried in. We tried to remember which flag had been Daddy's, and then we saw it, the Timberwolf, with its signature wolf head up, mouth open, as if in full howl. Mother and I burst into tears. All those years we kept his photographs tucked away in that box, but they were so small, and the horror was so large. George spoke at the ceremony. He said, when we remember the Holocaust and to whom it happened, we must also remember where it happened. It didn't happen in some remote or unfamiliar place. It happened right in the middle of the Western world. And the orders came not from crude and uneducated men, but from men who regarded themselves as cultured and well-schooled, modern, and even forward-looking. They had all the outward traits of cultured men, except for conscience. Their crimes show the world that evil can slip in and blend in among the most civilized surroundings. In the end, only conscience can stop it. In 2003, the G8 summit was held in Evian, France. Before the summit opened, George and I traveled to Poland and made a special visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau. George and I quietly walked along the train tracks that had carried carloads of humans piled on top of each other without light or fresh air. I laid a single red rose at the terminus where men, women, and children began to be herded left or right to the gas chambers or to the labor camp to work first and then die. As I walked, I realized there are things that textbooks, photographs, and even grain documentary footage cannot teach. They can't teach you how to feel when you see prayer shawls or baby shoes left by children torn from their mothers, or prison cells with scratch marks of attempted escape. And I wept when I saw the thousands of eyeglasses, their lenses still smudged with tears and dirt. I, who would be nearly blind without glasses or contacts, could suddenly imagine people being driven into terror with no way to see, groping about with their hands. And then there was the larger blindness of the people who lived around the camps and around the world, of all those who refused to see what was happening. The story of Lale and Gita in the book that we're about to read opened readers' eyes to a time that's impossible to imagine, and they show us that even in the darkest depths of horror, there is life, there is hope, and there is love. So thank you, Heather. Thank you for turning Lale and Gita's beautiful love story into a work of art and into a lesson for us all. Heather will be joined on stage by Ann Wicks, the Don Evans Family Managing Director of Opportunity and Democracy here at the Bush Institute. So please join me in welcoming Heather Morris and Ann Wilkes to the stage.
Hello, everyone. I had to put my glasses on, get ready for this. I have been looking forward to this conversation with Heather Morris for quite some time. I am thrilled that you all are here to share this with me, with all of us together. Heather, welcome to Dallas, welcome to Texas. We know, as Mrs. Bush said, that commute from Australia to this Mrs. Bush's book club is significant, and we're so appreciative that you made time to be here.
Look, thank you, and thank you all very much, and if there's any Kiwis in the audience, kia ora.
Okay, so you heard Mrs. Bush say that we have a bunch of educators here tonight,
Yes.
teachers and librarians, and you got to visit a school today,
I did.
Thomas Jefferson High School, for those of you who know, just up the way. What was that like?
And I'm going to see 2 more tomorrow, and I specifically asked if I could do that, because like Mrs. Bush, there are the 2 people I hold in the highest esteem are teachers and nurses. And so thank you for being here. Well, it was wonderful. I sat down with about 20 young students, and you know what? I was told it was their last day ever at school. In fact, their school life had ended an hour and a half earlier, and yet they chose to stay there and not go off and begin this incredible journey they all are and spend time listening to me have a chat to them. I was just so humbled. It was wonderful.
I can't imagine what a treat it was to have a real live author in their midst, and they'd been studying the Holocaust. What an amazing, amazing thing to have. Okay, so before we talk about this beautiful book, let's get to know you a little bit.
Ooh.
And your book now, of course, has a new life too, as a streaming series on Peacock and some other platforms around the world. So we'll get to all that. But writing is a little bit of a second career for you. How did that come to be?
Yeah, well, I was getting older, and I had this incredible story, and getting nowhere with it. And this is my retirement, folks. I wrote this 6 years ago at the age of 65, and so it just goes to show you that there is nothing you can't achieve if you still want to keep doing things. It was a matter of finding the right time for it to come out. And yes, I met Lale 20 years ago, and that's when I got the story, and that's when I wrote it initially. But nobody wanted to hear it 20 years ago. Isn't that often the way? It wasn't the right time for the world to hear, again, stories of the Holocaust. And can I just say, for any of you who do bother to go and watch the miniseries on Peacock, there is an actress there, Melanie Linsky, who is playing me. And you're going to look at her and you're going to go, hang on a minute, we saw her. What's going on here? Please keep in mind, I have mentioned it was 2003 that I met Lale, and I was younger, thinner, and blonder.
Hollywood.
No, Hollywood.
Yes. So as a first-time author, I can't really imagine how it feels that more than 12 million copies of The Tattooist of Auschwitz have been sold around the world in many languages. How are you doing with this newfound fame as this late-in-life author?
Look, I don't think of it in terms of those numbers. They're not important to me. What's important to me is being here with folks like you. And as far as I'm concerned, you are the only people that know about this story because you're here tonight to hear some more of it. I don't try and process those kind of numbers. That's for the publishers and maybe my accountant. But look, it's too humbling and it's too big to... You know, people can't process the sum of 6 million Jewish people dying in those camps. So, yes, I kind of see it in some ways the same. It's too big a sum.
Yes.
But I'm so humbled by it, believe me.
Well, let's turn to this book. Can you tell us how you met Lale?
I guess that's life's first lesson for me today, folks. And it really was a matter of don't say no to something if you don't have a good reason to say yes. I hadn't caught up with a friend for many months because I kept putting her off, and finally I did. And kind of reluctantly, too, I remember. It was a Sunday afternoon. we went and had coffee, and she just casually said to me, I have a friend whose mother has just died. His father has asked him to find someone he can tell a story to. That person can't be Jewish. You're not Jewish. Would you like to meet him? Well, I said, well, what's his story? And she said, I don't know. I just know that he wants to talk to somebody. But again, I said yes to meeting Lale Sokolov. And a week later, I knocked on his door and into his life, and he into mine and my family's. And for the next 3 years, yes, darling boy. See, younger than a blonder. But look, it really was one of those things that you cannot plan. It happened, and I, to my dying days, will be eternally grateful that this man took the time to get to know me. And that's what it was about. It wasn't about me getting to know him. It was about him getting to know me, to trust me with his story.
Well, why don't you say a little more about that? Why do you think he trusted you with the story? He had not really spoken of it in the years since it happened. And so what do you think it was? You've met the criteria of not being Jewish, but tell us a little bit more about why do you think he trusted you?
I think because I shut up and listened to him. It really was that simple. And yes, not being Jewish was absolute for him. And when I had been asked in Jewish communities, why was that? Don't you think he should have had a Jewish person tell his story? Well, he was very clear on that. For him, there could not be a Jewish person alive who was not touched by the Holocaust. And in his words, how could they tell my story when they have their own? And he was right, I think. He nailed it. And the Jewish community seemed to agree with him on that. A few didn't initially. But for him, and by the way, I had to tell him on that first meeting, in case it made a difference, that my mother's maiden name was Schwarzenegger. I think it was the first time he looked up from the ground, because, I mean, he'd just lost the love of his life, and he wouldn't look at me. And he did look up at me, and he went, "You German?" And I said, "No, Lale, I'm a good Kiwi girl." And that gave me the first clue, his next statement, to who this man was. When he shook his shoulders and he said, "Never mind, we can't pick our parents." And he was right. It didn't matter who my parents were and where they'd come from. He was prepared to get to know me as a person. And that's how it developed from that moment on. And he started dictating to me when I could come and see him. He was very good at that. And for many months, he greeted me every time I went there, which would be 2 or 3 times a week, because he always greeted me with the customary East European kiss on both cheeks. And the following statement, "Have you finished my book yet?" Even though he had not told me one single story or vignette that I was capable of writing. But he then also followed it up with the statement, "You have to hurry up. I need to be with Gita." And for many months, hearing that, "I have to be with Gita," just tore me apart. And then one day after I'd taken him home to meet my family and I'd allowed him to flirt with my 18-year-old daughter, the next time I saw him, he uttered those words, "Have you finished my book yet?" And I said, "No, Lale, and I'm writing a screenplay." Well, that just went through to the wicket keeper, as we say. He didn't register what I was saying.
That's a cricket reference.
Yeah. But then he turned around and he went and said, "Coffee's ready." He never said those words again, "I need to be with Gita." Now he wanted to re-engage with the Jewish community that he had had nothing to do with. And he wanted me to be by his side while he did that. And he would proudly take me to these amazing events with lots and lots of Holocaust survivors. By the way, Australia got the second largest number of Holocaust survivors outside of Israel. I was very, very lucky and privileged to meet many of them. And he would take me to these social events and walk in the door and proudly proclaim me as his girlfriend. Send me off to go and talk to the lady, saying he would pick me up on the way out. So very him. And that became our friendship for those next 3 years. And I was with him for his 90th birthday, and we had our cake and his terrible coffee. I used to get him to take me out for coffee after a little while, because he made terrible coffee. But we were in his apartment, and it was his 90th birthday. And it was 48 hours later that I got the call from his son to say that he had had a massive stroke, and he was in hospital and he was not going to recover. And his son paid me the greatest honor of saying, "You've been the most important person in my dad's life since my mum died. I would like you to spend time alone with him." Oh. And so I did. I sat with him for 2 hours, and I joked with him. At long last, I got to say something. And when I was told by a doctor and a nurse came and said that I had to leave, and I had a little conversation with them, and when I left, that nurse was holding his hand and weeping, and that doctor was wiping away tears. And the last thing I said to him as I kissed him goodbye, knowing he would not get to see the sun come up the next day, is that I would never, ever stop trying to tell his story. It took me a while, but I have never stopped. And yeah, you're now here to hear about Lale and Gita. Thank you.
Heather. Thank you for sharing that story. Thank you for sharing that. We were backstage talking about the power of story, and I was thinking about your getting the story from Lale was not a straight line, as you hinted.
Yeah.
What was your process like to sit? You started by listening, and sort of, how did that work as you were interviewing him, listening to him, and piecing together the story of Lale and Gita?
Look, first, I never interviewed him. I wouldn't know how to interview somebody if I tried. I just sat and listened to him. And initially, he was quite factual. You know, he was telling me things that I probably could have got if I went and consulted the books or Google. But for him, he wanted to tell me these little bits about himself, and he was glossing over a lot of the horror, and I could tell that. But I knew in time he would tell me if he wanted to. And I consulted with a colleague, a psychiatrist at the hospital I worked, because I worried, am I causing harm to him by spending this time with him and allowing him to revisit his past? And he was very clear that he would never tell me anything he didn't want me to know. But it was a matter of listening to him start telling me a vignette. Occasionally, if he got emotional, he then would slip into speaking in Slovakian, or sometimes German. If he was talking about the Russians, he was speaking Russian. And so I just shut up and listened, never, ever interrupted him. I would race home and try and scribble down notes on the computer of what I'd heard. And then a few weeks later, I'd sit with him. Instead of asking him to talk about his past, I would say, hey, listen, can I go over some of the things I've made a note of? And he was very happy with that point. Okay, what do you want to know? Well, who was this Schwartz guy? Oh, Schwarzhuber. Write his name down, please, Lale. I need the correct spelling. Because I didn't know. And that became the process. And then we were going out for coffee and going for walks on the beach. And we would either talk about the Holocaust or we wouldn't. It didn't matter. I was spending time with this wonderful old man. And I was very grateful that I had a wonderful boss who allowed me to, at Lale's whim, leave the office or leave the hospital and go and see him if I could. And we did, by the way, we got to that point where one day when he asked me about his book, and I went, I keep telling you I'm writing a screenplay. I went and did a couple of online courses and thought I knew everything. Little did I know. But then one day he finally said to me, well, what's a screenplay? I went, well, I want to see your story as a movie.
Yeah.
Or, wow, did he react to that? I go, a movie? You want to make a movie about me? And I went, yeah, be good. And he went, well, who will play me? I said, I don't know, Lale, we're not there yet, okay? And he went, Brad Pitt's a good-looking boy. I was a good-looking boy. You get me Brad Pitt. And I pointed out to him that Brad was too old. And so for the next, I think it was about 4 months, he and I had to go to every new release movie for him to find the perfect person to play Lale Sokolov. We finally went to a movie again. I'm going there. This guy, look, he's great. He's tall, he's handsome. And I go, you're not tall, but never mind, he is. And he's perfect for you. And it was the American actor James Marsden. Huh? And we sit down, and James comes on the screen. I dig him in the ribs. That's him. That's him. And he very loudly proclaims to everybody, what are you thinking? He doesn't look anything like me. And no, he's 20-something, and you're nearly 90. But 10 minutes later, Ryan Gosling came on the screen. He's on his feet now. That's me. He should be me. So he proclaims to everybody that Ryan Gosling and him should be one and the same. I sit him down for a bit, and Gosling's still on the screen. Sorry, Ryan. And he's back on his feet, and he's going, "You down the front, turn around and look at me. Don't you think he looks like me?" And so I'm trying to shush him up. Somebody in the audience started slow clapping. Now, I don't know about here, but down under, if somebody slow claps you, it means get off. For him, he turned around and looked at me and said, "See, they agree with me." So we had, according to him, the perfect person to play Lale Sokolov. We now have 2 people playing Lale Sokolov in the miniseries. We have young Lale, played by the wonderful actor Jonah Hauer-King, brilliant, brilliant young actor. And for playing Lale as an old man, giving what people are saying is the performance of his lifetime, and I can attest to that, is Harvey Keitel. Beyond brilliant. He absolutely embraced that role.
Yeah.
And spent many hours with me trying to learn all the quirks and the little idiosyncrasies of Lale, and then couldn't understand why I couldn't speak with an Eastern European accent to say his name properly.
Oh. We all have our flaws.
We do.
Right, Heather? Okay.
Harvey seemed to find plenty in me.
Yeah. Okay, so you told me that you consider yourself a storyteller and not an author.
Yeah.
Will you explain the difference for us?
I could not write a book out of my own head if I tried. I've been very lucky to have been able to write now 4 amazing stories of real people who existed and lived through extraordinary times. They are not my stories. I tell them. For me, authors are the Hilary Mantels and these incredible authors who write these brilliant books of literature. I prefer the title of the storyteller because I'm telling somebody else's story. Yeah.
So if you're in this room and you haven't read the book yet, you will go home and do so immediately. You'll want to. But here's the quick cliff notes. So this is the story of Lale, who was a Slovakian Jew who was deported to Auschwitz in 1942. He was made one of the camp's tattooists, so he was in charge of inking the numbers very crudely on the arms of his fellow prisoners. And one of those fellow prisoners was the woman who became his wife, Gita. So this book tells their story of how they fell in love, how they incredibly kept each other alive in horrific, hard-to-fathom conditions, and then how they reconnected after the war and eventually married. So you're seeing some pictures of them. And because it's book club, I wanted to read a couple of passages from the book and have you talk about them. There's brilliant themes in this story. One, of course, is love, and you're seeing that. Yeah. But another is about survival and what it looked like to survive during that time. So Lale and Gita are talking about their friend Silke, who had become sort of the plaything of the camp commandant, not by her own choice, of course, and they're talking about her. And Lale says to Gita, "Tell her I think she's a hero, and I'm proud to say I know her." "What do you mean hero? She's not a hero," Gita says with some annoyance. "She just wants to live. And that makes her a hero. You're a hero too, my darling. That the 2 of you have chosen to survive is a type of resistance to these Nazi bastards. Choosing to live is an act of defiance, a form of heroism." "So what does that make you?" asked Gita. "I have been given the choice of participating in the destruction of our people, and I have chosen to do so in order to survive. And I can only hope I am not one day judged a perpetrator or a collaborator." So that is a very heavy, powerful conversation to be having. Yes. Can you tell us about survival in this book?
You know, look, every person I met who was a survivor of that place had what they call survivor's guilt to different degrees and varying intensities. And yes, Lale had it, absolutely had it. Gita had it so bad that she would never ever talk about the time, except to him, he said, in the privacy of their bedroom. That's the only place that Gita would ever talk about that time. But for him, everyone who chose to survive, and you didn't get to really choose, you chose to try and survive. That was the only form of resistance that they could put up. And there were people there, and the history and the documentaries and the academics confirm this. There were people who chose not to survive. There were options, and that would be, of course, having a go at the guards or doing something to enable themselves to be killed. A quick death from a shot from one of the Nazis, for some, was a preferred way of existence. Lale, Gita, and hundreds of thousands of others said, we will resist to the best of our ability. And that resistance came by waking up in the morning and taking that next breath and taking that next step outside. In the case of beautiful Silke, this beautiful 16-year-old girl, she had to make the decision to continue to allow herself to be sexually abused to survive. That was her choice. And I will not hear of her being judged as anything but a beautiful young girl who wanted to live. What she did for that. She has been judged, Silke. She was judged not only by her fellow women in the camp, because when the Russians liberated the camp, and we're diverging a little bit from Lale's story, women in the camp pointed the finger at her and said she slept with the enemy. And that beautiful young girl, still only barely 19, was sent to a gulag in Siberia, 40 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle, for 10 years because she chose to survive. She played, that weighed so heavy on Lale, and he would cry as he said, there was nothing we could do to save her. And for him, that is probably more than anything, the painful memory that he has of Silke and her survival, because she ultimately saved his life. If you do read the book or watch the movie series, you will see the pivotal role she plays in saving his life to enable him to have those 60 years with Gita. No question about it.
One of the other excerpts and themes I want to read is something Mrs. Bush referenced in her remarks. This happened in the middle of villages, farms. This was not in the Arctic Circle. This was proximate to many people. And this was, I sort of knew that, but it was brought to life to me when I got to this part of the book. This is when the Russians are coming, it's chaos in the camp. The guards are trying to evacuate the women, herd them onto trains, get them out. No one really knows what's gonna happen. They're shooting some, they're marching the others. And Gita's with some girls, and they see a house across the field with some woods behind it. And one of them says, we're going to make a run for that house. If we get shot, then we will die here, but we're not going any further. Do you want to come with us? Gita stands up. Once the girls are running, they don't look back. The act of loading thousands of exhausted women onto the train takes all the guards' attention. The door to the house is open before they reach it. Inside, they collapse in front of a roaring fire, adrenaline and relief surging through them. Hot drinks are placed in their hands, along with bread. I read this for the first time, and it made me cry, because I thought about, that was right there. And there were people who understood, and rumors, and knew it was happening, and this idea of proximity to evil that people shut their eyes to. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that in this book and with Lale.
Look, it's the classic case of being a bystander, isn't it? And I can understand it at one level. Lale absolutely understood it, by the way, because the Polish people who lived in the town of Auschwitz around the camp, they would be coming in to work there every day. And when I challenged him on that, because I was angry to think that they could come in and do a job and then go home, and he kind of looked at me and went, they had mouths to feed, why shouldn't they? He had no beef with it. I have the beef all these years later with it, but I have to contain that. It was never my fight. But yes, they did. And I guess in Poland in particular, there is that element of that country was occupied. You don't blame the Polish people for what happened there. Even the ones who chose to go and work in those camps, because in Lale's words, they had mouths to feed. But I think that the people in Germany, and Gita and those girls, they were actually into Germany at this point, that they had pretended that there was nothing to see here, nothing had happened, and did play that game of we didn't know. Of course they knew. But again, those people are gone, and we never, ever, ever cast the sins of the father on the children and the grandchildren and the people that follow. And so it's not a matter of saying, yeah, get over it. You don't get over it. But there are some things you have to accept, that the people and what they did to collaborate. And Lale thought people would see him as a collaborator. I would refuse to see him as a collaborator, no matter what he did. Every single person, if you think about it, in Auschwitz-Birkenau worked for the Nazis. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If they were just sorting through the clothes in Canada, the girls that worked there, are they collaborators because they chose to live by sorting through the clothes? And the people who worked building up the bunks, the girls in the office doing all the paperwork, writing that red cross through the names when they were told these people are now gone to the gas chamber. They were all in some way working for that machinery of the Nazi Party. Yes, Lale was a privileged prisoner. He made no bones about that. But it didn't always mean that at no point, any point in the time of the day or night, he could still have been killed. What it did give him and what helped him with his relationship with Gita, it gave him freedom of movement. He was one of the tattooers, one of the tatoveras, as he called it. Actually, he never said he tattooed, by the way. He called it, he made the numbers. He made the numbers. He chose to do that as a way for him to survive. And it really was a case, if he didn't, somebody else would.
Yes.
And people got to make that choice. He made it. We do not judge him or anyone else there for the choices they made.
Let's turn to the story when it becomes sort of implausibly happy for Lale and Gita, and they are reunited miraculously on the street in Bratislava. Tell us about that. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, when Lale told me this, I went, "You've been watching too many Hollywood movies."
Yes.
It is a Hollywood ending, but it really happened. And because I kept thinking, oh, come on, surely somewhere along the line here you have created this story. I mean, the reality is that memory, of course, is something which is fallible. We like to remember things the way it feels good to remember them. And he did that so many times in his stories. But he gave me Gita's tape. Gita made a Shoah tape, as Lale did, for the Shoah Foundation, Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. He said, you watch Gita, and you hear what Gita has to say. And so I watched Gita's tape, and I went straight to the end there. And there I heard her saying how she was walking down the street in Bratislava with two of her friends, and one of them said, look at that funny little cart with that man and that horse. And she said, and I looked up, and it was my Lale. And I stepped out in front of the horse, and the horse stopped. He had come to Bratislava from his hometown of Krumpuki to find her, and she found him. And she says in her tape, she said, the horse stopped, and he got down off the cart, and he dropped to his knees, and for the first time ever in his life, he was speechless. Now, Gita was making this statement when she was in her 70s. She was an older woman, so she'd had all those years of never being able to find another occasion when Lale was speechless.
So Lale and Gita had a son, Gary, who you got to know, and he wrote an afterword in the book, which I found incredibly moving. He describes his parents as they were devoted to him and to each other.
Yeah.
And I think we have a picture of them with Gary. Would you tell us about Gary?
He was cuter then. No, look, yes, Gary is one of those poor first-generation survivor children for whom their parents told them next to nothing. But, of course, the trauma of their survival played out in other ways. And he told me that on Friday nights when they had friends around for Shabbat, and you've got to remember that none of the people, these survivors, or very few of them in Melbourne where they lived, had family. So the Jewish community was their family. So Friday night, Shabbat, many of them would all gather at different houses and that was their family. And he said that the kids were all there, and he said after dinner, the women all went out into the kitchen to clean up, and the men would sit around and they would be talking and they would be sharing some of their own stories. They were all survivors. And he said he used to break away from the kids who'd be sent to bedrooms to go and play there. He said he would break away and go and stand by the door and try and overhear what the men were saying. Apparently Lale and Gita, when he was 13 or 14, they said to him, there was a documentary series called The World at War came out. And they said to him they wanted him to watch that. They weren't going to watch it with him, And so Lale said we put him down in front of the TV when it came on. No streaming back then.
Right.
It had to be Thursday night at 8 o'clock or whatever it was. And he and Gita went out into the kitchen to wait. And after it was over, the first one, they went in and they said to him then, this was his chance, and they said to him, ask us anything and we will tell you the truth. And this 13, 14-year-old boy went, how big were those guns that the Nazis had? Not one question about what they were expecting to hear from them about their role and their part in World War II. And so at that point, it disappeared. Now, Gary is a very, very emotional man.
Yes.
And I was in London with him just a couple of weeks ago at the premiere of the miniseries there. And they couldn't actually put him in front of any journalists or anyone to interview because he just cried. So there's lots of photos of him there with all the actors. And a lot of those, you see young Jonah, who played his dad, and Anna, who played his mum, and the three of them are just sobbing uncontrollably at having come together. But look, I had a lovely email from him just last night, actually, when I got to my hotel. I sent him some of the updates on how the miniseries is doing and how the book is doing now it's having a second lease on life. And so he's very, very touched by it all. And I think he may have said something in there about could he and I go on a cruise at some time, but I must get back to him on that. The answer's no, actually, Gary.
Book club on a cruise.
He's so grateful that the story of his parents is out there and feels very unworthy to talk about them because he didn't. You know, that man had to learn about his parents reading the manuscript. Mm-hmm. Oh, do you want to hear a funny story about Gary, though?
Yes, of course.
I told you I'd written the book as a screenplay, and very, very amateurish and rough, but on Lale's, I think, must have been his 89th birthday, he and Gary and I are sitting down for his birthday, and I gave Lale a copy of the draft of the screenplay I'd written. I had it all bound up and looking very nice. And I gave it to him, and Lale opens it and unwraps it. He's running his hand page up. He's running his name just over, his finger over Gita's name. On every page, he's looking for Gita's name. And then Gary says to him, let me have a look at it. So he takes it off his father, and I'm sitting like here, Lale's there, and Gary's there. So Gary starts reading and flicking through the pages, and he goes, oh, Heather, there's a scene in here you'll have to take out. I can't have anything in my parents' story that isn't true. Look, I've taken a few liberties, but not too many. I went, absolutely, show me the scene, and I'll take it out. He shows me the scene, I start reading it, I know immediately which scene it is. I hand it to Lale, and I say, Lale, read this. So Lale starts reading the scene, and his head's going down and down. I said, Lale, is it true? And he went, Lale, do you want me to take that scene out? And he went, well, Gary stood up, gave his dad a playful smack over the head and went, how could you sleep with my mother before you were married? He stormed off to get something stronger to drink, and Lale finally lifted his head up and he went, you had to be there. Go, good one, Lale. You tell the kid. This kid was man in his 40s, by the way, at this point.
I had a feeling that's where that was going. As Mrs. Bush said in her opening, this book is a work of art, right? It's not a historical document. It's not a memoir. And there have been some questions about, is this the historical accuracy? This is a nonfiction book, but it's not a nonfiction book. How do you respond to that?
I wrote this book in the words of Lale. And if his memory doesn't account with the historians and the academics, then I won't apologize. I have always been very, very clear. I have not told the story of the Holocaust. I've just told a Holocaust story, just the one. I have met many survivors. Every one of them has a different story. And they say to me, our stories are the same. Our stories are different, but they are the same. And yes, if the academics and the historians would prefer that only their account was told, well, that's their right to think that. And I have no beef with that. We need them. Mm-hmm. I kind of think that maybe you need stories like this as well. And yes, I don't go into, and I think one of the criticisms just recently was that I never showed enough of the deaths and enough of the killing and enough of the evil, and my book doesn't tell that enough. You won't turn the page if I did that. And how are you going to hear the story if you don't turn the page? So, look, I accept their criticism, absolutely accept them. I accept their right to voice them. And all I ask is for that same respect that I'm told this one story of this man, the one story of Silke, and the story of the three sisters, Sibby, Magda, and Livy, three other young girls who survived. And I hope that you can relate to the story of the one. It's very hard to picture 6 million, isn't it? I'll give you one, maybe two. Relatable.
Yes. It is. There is no way to truly understand history without the stories. There's really no way to understand it.
Well, Steven Spielberg saw that when he made Schindler's List. Mm-hmm. And what he then did, and I alluded to it earlier on, by sending videographers all around the world, go and find these survivors and record their stories. I'm told he's got some 50,000 of them somewhere in Bolton, California. He saw the worth of those individual stories. They make up the sum of the story of the Holocaust.
So as I mentioned when we started, your remarkable book, Lale's and Gita's Story, is now a Peacock series. It's on streaming on other platforms around the world. So let's take a moment to watch the trailer. It just was released about a week ago.
Mr. Sokolov.
Call me Lale.
You're looking for someone to write your life story.
So this is a love story.
Out! Go! Welcome to Auschwitz. Get up! Get dressed!
This is what it was every morning.
The new tattooist. I am now in charge of you.
Tattoo people. It's not something I can do. Every time I open my eyes, I am still there.
You have to find something in your mind. A good thing. Can't get in here.
But I found something there. Someone.
Can you be here?
Thinking about that guy. What guy?
We must keep living, whatever it takes. Love still exists. Even here.
Oh, Heather, how did that series come to be? That the book has become this, and I know you were very, very involved in its creation and its filming.
Look, very early on when the book came out, it didn't come out here in America for about 9 months after it had been released in many other countries. The publishers here were a little bit scared of it, and it took one very brave publisher at HarperCollins to bite the bullet and agree to publish this. And so there was this gap, and the makers of it, by the way, the Synchronicity Films, who are the makers of it, they maintain that they got in quick before it came out in America, otherwise somebody here would have snaffled it up. But we had offers to make it into a feature film, and that's what Lale and I had thought it would be.
With Ryan Gosling.
No, he was too old, sure. He's now too old. But isn't Jonah incredible? But we got the offer for a 6-part miniseries, and I went 6 hours versus 2 hours, no contest. I'll take it. But one of the things I insisted when we were drawing up that contract with the Synchronicity Films and Sky was that I had to be involved. I didn't want to oversee everything they were doing, but I needed to see every word that was going to be said by Lale or Gita. They could put words into some of the other people's mouths, knock yourselves out. You want to make Beretsky worse than he was? He's yours, but not Lale and Gita. So I was the script consultant, and there's every draft, and trust me, there are many drafts over the last 4 years to get to this point. I approved every word that was in it. So yes, it differs from the book because you just saw there's Harvey and Melanie playing me. But really what they're playing is the afterword or my author's notes in the back of the book. I do put a whole lot of author notes telling you what happened from my perspective. And so they merged these two into the one narrative of the thing. I am very proud of it. It's not a word I use very often about being proud about anything, but I am for this. Some 5,000 people worked on bringing you this miniseries. I got to go on set a few times. I was there the very first day when they rolled camera with the young actors, and then later when Harvey and Melanie were there. And to see the lengths that those incredible young actors, both the cast and the extras, went to, and the help they had to be able to make this very, very important story for them. The girls all shaved their head off, and that hair was then given to a charity in Slovakia to be turned into wigs for children with cancer. They were filming this in February and March under very, very cold conditions. It's all been filmed in Bratislava. The producers and the makers of it had on set every day 3 mental health professionals there to guide and to help these people with what it was that they were doing, because they were all being affected from it. You know, I met the guy, you saw him briefly there, Pepin, he was the original tattooist in the story. I met that actor just last Thursday night in LA when I flew in. And he told me how that he was there filming for about 3 months, and he came home, he said, and about a month after he returned home to LA, he said, I went into the deepest depression. He said, it all hit him then. But he knew he just had to pick up the phone to Claire Mundell, the producer of this, and Claire would have a mental health expert on the phone to him within 10 minutes in LA, no matter what the time of the day or night was. And he has used that person. The actor playing Beretsky, the young German actor, he is the most beautiful young man. And this was the toughest role. He can never imagine he says playing a role anything like this again. And it had an incredible effect on him. He also, sounds terrible, doesn't it? We've created this thing that people are requiring help from mental health experts. But they're getting it, and there would be no question at any point in their lives going forward, they pick up the phone and they will have whatever help they need. So incredible links, both emotional and physical, that they went to. 500 extras on set every day. Just an incredible thing, and you saw the credit there. When I was in Slovakia during one of the shoot times, and Claire came to have dinner with me, the producer, and a couple of others, and she was shaking when she came there because she'd been called to a Zoom meeting by London, by the people at Sky, and she didn't want to go. I'm making a film. Go away, I'm busy, I'm filming. She took the Zoom meeting because she was told she had to. And the other person who then joined them from LA was the incredible, the one and only composer, Hans Zimmer. He was pitching to them for the right to create the music for this miniseries. And he and Cara Tell have his little protege, well, not little, she's his protege. She's this beautiful young mid-20-year-old woman who he considers the finest musician he's ever worked with. And I've hung out with her quite a bit in London recently. The two of them have written this incredible score. Cara actually plays the piano on this score. A piano that belonged to her grandmother. Her grandmother was a 9-year-old girl in Paris when the Nazis came into their home and took away all her family except for her. Her name wasn't on the list. Her parents and her siblings were taken. And when they left and her mother pushed her away, told her not to come, she ran to the only home that she knew, and that was of her piano teacher. Her piano teacher in Paris kept her there and kept her in hiding for the remainder of the war, and all she had to save herself each day or get some comfort was playing this piano that belonged to this couple. When they died, they gifted her this piano. Her grandmother brought that piano to America to start a new life here. That piano has never been tuned. And Cara plays it on here. And then when Hans decided he wanted a song, Claire had the whole thing. This was in the can, it was wrapped, it was done. And Hans Zimmer decides, I think we need a song. And he says to Claire, if we can have a song, who would be the one person you would want to sing it? And she said, the very person we couldn't get. He said, tell me who. And she said, well, Barbra Streisand, of course. Barbra Streisand agreed to sing a song that wasn't even written. And she has recorded the song called Love Will Survive. She has never, ever sung a song for a television production. She has never sung a song for a production she's not been involved in. That is the level of commitment from so many incredibly wonderful, talented, the kind of people that I wouldn't even consider mentioning in the same name as my book.
Yes.
Yeah, Hans Zimmer, Cara Talvi, Barbra Streisand. Not a bad lineup, is it, guys?
I was holding it together until that piano story. That is, thank you for sharing that. Before we close tonight, I'd love for you, this book, it was so many people have been called to this story, the actors you were just talking about, the musicians and the composers, everyone involved in the book, the series who are called, even at times when it's painful, to tell this story. So I'm hoping you might have a call to action for all of us, those who have read the story, seen the series. What would you like us to do now that we know Lale and Gita's story?
Oh, look, it's very simple. Never forget. That's it. Never forget, folks. And the people who you know and you love and are part of your life, share a little bit of this with them so that they never forget.
Heather, thank you so much for this. I feel like we could talk for hours. I wish. Truly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is not my comfort zone, folks. But thank you. You humble me and you honor Lale Sokolov for the bravery that he showed to tell this story. And it took guts, guys. It took so much guts for him. He went through so much, and I witnessed that. I know we've got 000 on there, but you want to know what one of the hardest stories he had to tell me, and he didn't tell me? He kept telling me that he lost all his family, and it was months after that he finally one day was upset. I said, what's wrong today? And he went, I have to tell you about Goldie. I went, who's Goldie? You've not mentioned her name before. He said, I know, because it's too painful, because she's my sister and she survived. And for him going home, and I can't read that part of the book, for him finding his sister alive, look, I think it in some ways meant more to him than finding Gita. He had that one connection, Goldie. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think I've really cried on the stage before, but I'm certainly glad to do it tonight. I am really moved by this. I'm so glad we all got to share this together. Thank you, Heather. And I have to do a couple things, and then I'm going to give you some instructions here. I'd like to thank, once again, Next Point, who endows Engage at the Bush Center and lets us do events like this. We're really grateful for their support. And we're also really grateful to H-E-B, everyone's favorite grocery store. If you live in Texas, you know, for their support tonight, and for all the Dallas ISD teachers and educators who are here with us. Thank you. And here's a real treat for you all. As you exit from the museum, folks will show you how to get upstairs. Heather will be in our Freedom Hall doing a short meet and greet if you'd like to speak to her. So thank you, Heather, for doing that. There are signed copies of The Tattooist of Auschwitz upstairs and for sale if you need to add to your collection. And Heather's newest book, Sisters Under the Rising Sun, which is a remarkable story we'll have to talk about another time, are on sale on the way out. And of course, the books on Mrs. Bush's summer reading list are for sale in our museum store as well. So lots for you to do on your way out. And if you're not already a member of the Bush Center, please take tonight as an opportunity to become one. Then you get first dibs on all the things that come out. This event sold out really quickly. A lot of our things do, so that's a great way to stay in touch. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Heather. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you so much.